Greenwitch, Day 4, Chapter 5. Simon burrowed deeper into the small, cozy cave between pillow and bedclothes. Enya, go away. Oh, come on, Simon. Barney tugged persistently at the sheet. Get up. It's a super morning. Come and see. Everything's all shiny from the rain last night. We could go down to the harbor before breakfast, just for a walk. No one else is awake. Come on. Growling, Simon opened one eye and blinked at the window. In the clear blue sky, a seagull turned and lazily drifted, arcing down on unmoving wings. Oh well, he said. All right. In the harbor, nothing moved. Boats hung motionless at their moorings, their massed images unrippled in the still water. There was a sea smell of creosote from nets draped for mending over the harbor wall. Nothing broke the silence but the clatter of a distant milk van somewhere high up in the village. The boys pattered down rain-patched steps and through narrow alleys down to the sea. The sunshine on their faces was already warm. As they stood looking down at the nearest boats, a village mongrel trotted up, sniffed amiably at their heels, and went on his way. Rufus might be out too, Barney said. Let's go and see. All right, Simon ambled after him, content, relaxed in the stillness and the sunshine and the gentle swish of the sea. There he is. The rangy red dog came bounding towards them across the quayside. He pranced about them, tail waving, white teeth grinning as the long pink tongue lolled out. Idiot dog, said Simon affectionately as the tongue curled wetly round his hand. Barney squatted down and gazed solemnly into Rufus's brown eyes. I do wish he could talk. What would you tell us, boy, eh? About the painter from the dark and where he took you. Where was it, Rufus? Where did he hide you, eh? The setter stood still for a moment looking at Barney, then he cocked his narrow head on one side and gave a curious noise that was half bark, half whine, like a kind of question. He swung round, lolloped a few paces along the quay, then stopped and looked back at them. Barney stood up slowly. Rufus trotted away a few more steps, then again turned and looked back, waiting for them. What on earth? Said Simon, watching. He wants to show us. Barney hopped nervously up and down. Come on, Simon, quick. He'll show us where the painter hides, I bet you, and we shall be able to tell Gamary. Rufus whined, questioning. I don't know, Simon said. We have to get home. Nobody knows where we are. Oh, come on, quick, before he changes his mind. Barney grabbed his arm and tugged him after the lean red dog, already trotting away now confidently across the quay. Rufus led them straight across the harbor and round into the road that ran inland from the grey house and the sea. The road was familiar at first, leading back through the narrowest part of the village, past quiet cottages sleeping behind lace-curtained windows, and once or twice a modest house grandly labeled private hotel. Then they were behind Trowick in the hedge-rimmed farmland that curved around the white cones and green ponds of the Clayborough country, until far inland it met the moors. Simon said, We can't go much farther. Barney said, we shall have to turn back. Just a little bit more. On they went along silent roads bright with springtime green of newly full trees. Simon looked around him, with the flickerings of unease in his mind. Nothing was wrong. The sun warmed them. Dandelions brightly starred the grass. What could be wrong? Suddenly Rufus turned off the road into a narrow, leafy lane. A signpost at the corner read Pentreath Farm. On either side the trees reached their branches up and over to arc in a leafy roof. Even in full daylight the lane was shadowed, cool with only a faint dappling of sunshine filtering through the leaves. All at once Simon was filled with an immense foreboding. He stood stone still. Barney looked over his shoulder. What's wrong? I don't know exactly. Did you hear something? No, It's as if I've been here before, Simon shivered. It's the funniest feeling, he said. Barney looked at him nervously. Perhaps we really should go back. Simon did not answer. He was staring ahead, frowning. Rufus, who had disappeared round a corner in the lane for a moment, was bounding back again in a great, unexplained hurry. Into the trees, quick! Simon grabbed Barney's arm, and with the dog close behind them, they slipped into the thicket of the trees and brush that edged each side of the road. In their picking their way carefully from tree to tree to avoid rustling footfalls, they inched forward until they could see the part of the lane that lay ahead round the corner. They did not speak or whisper. They scarcely breathed, and at their feet Rufus crouched still as a dead dog. There ahead, the trees were no longer thick, the land no longer a leafy tunnel. Instead they saw a wide field scattered with large single trees and clumps of scrub. Across it the lane was no more than a grassy track, two wheel-worn ruts, winding away to where the trees grew thick again. It did not look as though many people used the path to Pentreath Farm, and there was no sign of any farmhouse. Instead, clear ahead of them, In the sunlit field they saw a caravan. It stood still, glittering and handsome, a real old-fashioned gypsy caravan, of a kind they had never seen before except in pictures. Above the high wood-spoked wheels rose white wooden sides, sloping gently outwards, up to the curved wooden roof with its cone-hatted chimney. At each corner between roof and walls, brightly painted scrollwork filled the eaves. In the side walls, square windows were set, neatly curtained. Leaning down from the front of the van were shafts for the horse that stood grazing quietly nearby. At the rear, a sturdy six-rung ladder led up to a door painted with ornate decorations to match the scrollwork, a split door, of the kind used in stables, with the top half hanging open and the lower half latched shut. As they crouched behind the trees, breathlessly staring, a figure appeared in the doorway, opened with this lower door, and began descending the steps of the caravan. Barney tightened his grip on Simon's arm. There was no mistaking the long, wild, dark hair, the snarling brow. The painter was even dressed exactly as he had been both times before, like a fisherman, in a navy blue jersey and trousers. He swallowed nervously at the impact of the man's nearness. It was as if there was a cloud of malevolence around him. Barney was suddenly very glad that they were deep in the trees, out of possible sight. He stood very still indeed, praying that Rufus would not make a sound. But although indeed there was no sound anywhere in the clearing except the clear morning song of birds in the trees, the dark man paused suddenly at the bottom of the caravan steps. He lifted his head and turned it all around, like a deer questing. Barney saw that his eyes were shut. Then the man turned full in their direction. The cold eyes opened beneath the lowering brows, and he said clearly, "Barnabas Drew, Simon Drew, come out." No thought of running away came into their minds, or anything but unquestioning obedience. Barney walked automatically forward out of the trees, and felt Simon moving with him in the same unhesitating way. Even Rufus trotted docile at their side. They stood together in the sunlit field beside the caravan, facing the dark man in his dark clothes, and although the sun was warm on their skin, it seemed to them that the day had become chill. The man looked at them, unsmiling, expressionless. "What do you want?" he said. Somewhere in Barney's mind, as a spark flickers and finds tinder and blazes up into a flame, a small light of resentment flared suddenly into a crossness that burned away fear. He said boldly, "Well, for one thing, I'd like my drawing back." Beside him, he half saw Simon shake his head a little, like one pushing away sleep, and knew that he too was clear of the spell. He said more loudly, "You stole my drawing down in the harbor, goodness knows why, and I liked it, and I want it back." The dark eyes contemplated him coolly. It was impossible to read any emotion behind them. "Quite a promising little scribble for your age." "Well, you certainly don't need it," Barney said. For a moment he spoke with admiration, thinking of the real power in the man's painting. "No," said the man with an odd, grim half-smile. "Not now." He moved back up the steps and through the double door. Over his shoulder he said, "Very well then, come on." Rufus, who had stood stock still from the beginning, began a low rumbling growl deep in his throat. Simon put a hand down to quiet him and said, "That wouldn't be very sensible, Barney." But Barney said lightly, "Oh no, I think it would be all right." He moved towards the caravan steps. Simon had no choice but to follow him. "Stay, Rufus," he said. The setter folded his long legs and lay down at the foot of the steps, but still the long, low growl went on eerie and unbroken. They could hear it soft in the background like a reminder of warning. The dark man had his back to them. "Look well at the Romani Vardo," he said without turning. "There are few of them to be seen any more." "Romani?" said Simon. "Are you a gypsy?" "Half Romani Chow," the man said, "and half Gorgio." He turned and stood with his arms folded, surveying them. "I am part gypsy, yes. That's the best you'll find these days on the road at any rate. Even the Vardo is only part gypsy." He nodded at the roof of the caravan, and they saw, looking up, that it was edged all about with the same brightly painted scrollwork that decorated the outside, and that tools of some small kind hung all over one wall, with an old fiddle and an oddly striped woolen rug. But the furniture was shiny, cheap, and modern, and the chimney was not a real chimney, but only a vent for carrying away hot air from above the neat electric stove. Then they saw suddenly that the ceiling was painted. From end to end, above the bright conventional curlicues of the scrollwork, a huge churning abstract painting was spread above their heads. There was no recognizable form to its shapes and colors, yet it was a disturbing and alarming sight, full of strange whorls and shadows, and shot through with lurid colors that jarred out the senses. Barney felt again the power and the nastiness that leapt at him from the canvas he had seen the man painting in the harbor. Up on the ceiling, too, he saw the particular unnerving shade of green he had found so unpleasant out there. He said suddenly to Simon, "Let's go home." "Not yet," said the dark man. He spoke softly, without moving, and Barney felt the chill awareness of the dark reaching out to control him, until without warning a faint hissing sound that had been vaguely puzzling him erupted into the boiling of a kettle, and a shrill whistle filled the room and made a sense of evil suddenly ridiculous. But Simon had felt it too. He looked at the dark man and thought, "You keep steering us away from being frightened, delaying it. Why do you want us to stay?" The dark-haired man busied himself with the prosaic matter of spooning instant coffee into a mug and pouring on water from the kettle. "Either of you drink coffee?" he said over his shoulder. Simon said quickly, "No, thank you." Barney said, "I wouldn't mind a drink of water." Seeing Simon scowl, he added plaintively, "Well, I did get awfully thirsty walking, not just a drink of water from the tap." "In that cupboard by your right foot," the painter said, "you will find some cans of orange soda." He moved to the small table at the end of the caravan, stirring his coffee. "Sealed," he added with deliberate, ironic stare at Simon. "Fizzy, harmless, straight from the factory." "Thanks," Barney said promptly, bending to the cupboard door. The man said, "You might bring out a cardboard box you'll find in there, too." "All right." After some bumping and rattling, Barney came up with an unremarkable brown box, set it on the table, and produced 2 drinks from the crook of his elbow. Without comment, Simon took one and popped open the top to a reassuring hiss. But a stubborn caution still made him reluctant to drink, and he made only a pretense of swigging at the can. Barney drank thirstily, with appreciative gurgling noises. "That's better, thanks. Now may I have my picture back?" "Open the box," the man said, the long hair falling about his face as he drank from his mug. "Is it in there?" "Open the box," the man said again, with a faint edge of strain in his voice. Simon thought, "He's as tense as a strung wire. Why?" Setting down his drink on the table, Barney opened the top of the brown cardboard box. He took out a sheet of paper and held it up critically. "Yes, that's my drawing." He glanced back into the box, and then all at once a brightness was in his eyes, a fierce brilliance flashing into his brain, and he was staring in disbelief, crying out in a voice that broke into huskiness, "Simon, it's the Grail." In the same instant the world about them changed. With a crash, the doors of the little caravan swung shut. The blinds fell over the windows, cutting out all light of day. There was an instant of black darkness, but almost at once Barney found himself blinking in a dim light. Wildly he looked round for its source. Then he realized with a sick shock that the glow, still dim, disturbing, came not from any lamp, but from the painted ceiling. Up on the roof, the eerie green whorls that had so troubled him were shining with a cold, bleak light. They had shapes, he saw now, angular shapes, arranged in groups, like a kind of unknown writing. In the cold green light he looked down, fearful, disbelieving, and saw the same wonderful, familiar object that he had seen before, gleaming inside the cardboard box. Gently he lifted it out, forgetting everything around him, and set it on the table. Simon breathed beside him. "It is." Before them, on the table, the Cornish Grail glowed, the little golden goblet they had first seen, after so hard a search, deep in a cave beneath the cliffs of Kamar Head, and that they had saved from the people in the power of the dark, for a while. They did not understand what it was, or what it could do. They knew only that to Merriman and the light it was one of the great things of power, something of infinite value, and that one day it would come into its own, when the strange runic signs and the words engraved over its sides could be understood. Barney gazed as he had gazed 1,000 times before at the pictures and patterns and incomprehensible signs on the golden sides of the Grail. If only, but the ancient, lead-encased manuscript that they had found with the Grail in that deep lost cave lay now at the bottom of the sea, flung by Barney himself from the end of Kamar Head in the last desperate effort to save Grail and manuscript from the pursuing dark. Though the Grail had been saved, the manuscript had come to the sea, and only in that manuscript was the secret by which the vital message written on the Grail could be understood. The dim light in the caravan could not dull the glow that came from the Grail. Yellow it blazed like a fire before them, warm, glittering. Simon said softly, "It's all right, not a scratch on it." A cold voice from the shadows said, "It is in good hands." Abruptly they were out of their absorption with the Grail, and back in the ominous half-light of the painter of the dark. The man's black bead eyes glittered at them from behind the table. With a surreal pattern of black and white, black eyes, white face, black hair, and there was a deeper strength and confidence in the voice now, a note of triumph. I allow you a sight of the Grail, he said, to make a bargain with you. You make a bargain with us? Simon said, his voice coming out higher and louder than he had intended. All you do is steal things. Barney's drawing, Captain Tom's dog, and the Grail. It must have been you who stole it from the museum, and your friends. I have no friends, said the man unexpectedly, swiftly. It seemed a bitter reaction that he could not help, and for a moment there was a faltering of his cold gaze as he knew it. In the next instant he was composed again, looking down at them both in a total self-possession. Stealing can be a means to an end, my young friend. My end is very simple, and there is no harm in it. All I require is 5 minutes of your time, of your small brother's time, that is, and of a certain talent that he has. I'm not leaving him alone, not for a minute, Simon said. I did not suggest you should. What then? Barney said nothing, but watched cautiously. For once he felt no resentment that Simon should be taking over. Deep inside his mind, something was beginning to fear the strange, taut, white-faced man more and more, perhaps because he had so clearly blazing a talent. It would have been much easier to face an uncomplicated monster. The painter looked at Barney. He said, It is very simple, Barnabas Drew. I shall take the cup that you choose to call the Grail, and I shall pour into it some water and a little oil. Then I shall ask you to sit calmly and look into the cup and tell me what you see. Barney stared at him in amazement. Like a sea mist, a strange idea wreathed into his mind. Was the man not evil at all, but simply off his head, a little mad? That could, he suddenly realized, explain everything the strange painter had done. After all, even great artists sometimes did odd things, acted strangely. Think of Nutty Van Gogh. He said carefully, Look at the water and the oil and tell you what I see. Oil does make nice patterns on water and colors. Well, that sounds harmless enough, doesn't it, Simon? I suppose so, Simon said. He was staring hard at the dark man, at the wild eyes and the pale, intent face, and the same hypnotic suggestion was creeping into his own mind. He, too, was thinking it more and more likely that their supposed adversary might not have anything to do with the dark at all, whatever Great Uncle Mary may have thought, but be simply an eccentric, a harmless nut, in which case it would be safest to humor him. Yes, he said firmly, why not? Simon thought, when this daftness is all over, we can grab the Grail and run. Give him the slip now, call Rufus in, get the girl back to Mary. He looked hard at Barney, trying to communicate, nudged him surreptitiously, and flicked his eyes at the Grail. Barney nodded. He knew what his brother was trying to tell him. The same thought was only too vivid in his own mind. The dark man ran some water from the tap into a glass and poured it into the Grail. Then he took a small brown bottle from a shelf near the table and added a drop or two of some kind of oil. He looked greedily at Barney, the tension in him saying like a plucked wire. Now, he said, sit down here and look hard. Look hard, look long, and tell me what you see. Barney sat in the chair before the table and slowly took the glowing golden chalice in both his hands. Though the inscribed gold of the outside was as bright as it had ever been, the inside surface was a dull black. Barney stared down at the liquid in the bowl. In the cold green light from above his head, incomprehensibly shining out from the patterns of the painted ceiling, he watched a thin layer of oil on the surface of the water swirl and coil into itself, curving, breaking, and joining again, forming islands that drifted out and then vanished, merging into the rest. And he saw. Darkness took hold of his brain like sudden sleep, and he knew nothing more. Chapter 6. Jane was almost in tears. But they couldn't just disappear. Something awful must have happened. Nonsense, Merriman said. They'll be rushing in any moment now, demanding their breakfast. But breakfast was more than an hour ago. Jane stared drastically out over the harbor, busy and bustling in the sunshine. They stood on the little paved path outside the cottages, above the winding web of stairs and alleys that led down into the harbor side. Will said, I'm sure they're all right, Jane. They must have woken up early and wandered out for a walk and gone farther than they intended. Don't worry. I suppose you're right. I'm sure you are. It's just that I keep having this awful picture in my mind of them going out to Kamar Head the way we used to last year, and one of them getting stuck on the cliff or something. Oh dear, I know I'm being stupid. I'm sorry, Mary. Jane shook back her long hair impatiently. It all comes of seeing the Greenwitch falling, I suppose. I'll shut up. I tell you what, said Will. Why don't we go out to Kamar Head, just to check? You feel a lot happier. Brightening, she gazed from one to the other of them. Could we really? Of course we could, Merriman said. Mrs. Penhallow will give the Trants their breakfast if they arrive in the meantime. You two start off. I'll have a word with her and catch you up." Jane beamed. "Oh, that's much better. Waiting's awful. Thank you, Will." "Don't mention it," said Will cheerfully. "Lovely morning for a walk." Into Merriman's mind, he said unhappily, "The dark has them, I think. You feel it?" But without harm, came the answer, cool in his thoughts, "and perhaps to our gain." Barney stood at the door of the caravan, blinking in the sunlight. "Well," he said, "aren't we going to get them?" "What?" Simon said. "The drinks, of course." "What drinks?" "What's the matter with you?" "The drinks he just offered us. He said there are cans in a little cupboard. You could help yourselves, and something about a cardboard box." Turning to go in, he glanced at his brother in amusement. He stopped abruptly. "Simon, what is the matter?" Simon's face was white and strained, the lines of it drawn downwards in a strange adult expression of concern and distress. He stared at Barney for a moment, and then he seemed to make a great effort and wrench himself onto the same level of conversation. "You get them," he said. "The drinks. You get them. Bring them out here. It's nice in the sunshine." There was a sound behind them inside the caravan, and Barney saw Simon jump as if he had been stabbed. Then again he saw the same straining for control. Simon leaned back against the wall of the caravan, his face up to the sun. "Go on," he said. Puzzled, Barney went into the caravan, its interior bright with the sunshine streaming in through the windows. The dark painter was sipping a cup of coffee, leaning on the table. "This one?" Barney waved a foot at the little cupboard under the sink. "That's right," the man said. Down on his knees, Barney took out 2 cans of orange soda, then peered round the dark little cupboard. "You said a cardboard box, but I can't see one." "Not important," said the painter. "There's something, though." Barney reached in and took out a piece of paper. After one glance, he sat back on his heels and looked up at the man without expression. "It's my drawing that you took." "Well," said the man, "that's what you came for, isn't it?" His dark eyes glinted coldly at Barney beneath the scowling brows. "Take it and drink your drink, and go." Barney said, "I'd still like to know why you ran off with it." "You irritated me," the man said shortly. He put down his coffee cup and motioned Barney towards the door. "No brat criticizes my work. Don't start again." His voice rose ominously as Barney opened his mouth. "Just go now." Simon said from the doorway. "What's the matter?" "Nothing," said Barney. Rolling up the drawing, he picked up the 2 cans and went to the door. "I'm not really thirsty," Simon said. "Well, I am." Barney drank deep. The painter stood watching them, scowling, barring their way back into the caravan. Outside in the sunshine, his big horse moved one placid step forward, rhythmically ripping at the grass. Simon said, "May we go now?" The man's eyes narrowed. He said swiftly, "I have no hold over you. Why ask me?" Simon shrugged. "Just now Barney said, 'Let's go home.' And you said, 'Not yet,' that's all." A kind of relief seemed to flicker over the other's dark face. "Your brother has his precious drawing, so go, up to the left of the farm." He waved at the hand at the grassy lane, disappearing on round the corner. "You'll find a shortcut back to the village. The path's a little overgrown, but it'll take you to Kamar Head." "Thank you," Simon said. "Goodbye," said Barney. They went on across the field without looking back. It was like coming out of the dark mist. "You think it's a trap?" Barney whispered. "Someone might be lying in wait for us at the farm." "Too complicated," Simon said. "He doesn't need traps." "All right." Trotting alongside, Barney peered at him curiously. "Simon, you really do look awful. Are you sure you're all right?" "Do shut up about it," Simon said, fierce and low. "I'm fine. Just get a move on." "Look," said Barney in a moment as they rounded the corner. "It's empty." A low gray stone farmhouse faced them, obviously deserted. Nothing moved anywhere. Old pieces of machinery lay rusting in the yard, and several windows gaped black and jagged-edged. The thatched roof of an outside outhouse was sagging ominously. Brambles waved wild green arms where the woods were stealing in towards the house. "No wonder he's living in a caravan. Do you think he's really half gypsy?" "I doubt it," Simon said. "Just a handy explanation for looking different, and for the caravan. I don't know why, but Gameri will. There's the path." He headed for a break in the tangled growth near the old house, and they pushed their way along a narrow bramble-crossed track. "I'm ravenous," Barney said. "Hope Mrs. Penhall's got eggs and bacon." Simon glanced round, his face still drawn. "I've got to talk to Gameri. We both have. I can't explain yet, but it's terribly urgent." Barney stared. "Well, won't he be at home?" "Might be. But they'll have had breakfast ages ago. They'll be out looking for us." "Where?" "I don't know. We could try the Gray House to begin with." "Okay," Barney said cheerfully. "This path must come out pretty near there, and we can—" He stopped dead, staring at Simon. "Rufus! We didn't bring him back. Simon, how awful. I clean forgot about him. Where did he go?" "He ran away. That's one of the things I have to explain about." Wearily, Simon went on up the path. "It's all part of the same thing. We've just got to find Great Uncle Mary as soon as we possibly can, or something's going to go horribly wrong." "There's no sign of them up here." Will came clambering back across the rocks at the tip of Kamar Head. No, Merriman said. He stood still, the sea wind blowing his white hair back like a flag. They might have climbed down into the next bay, to the rocks at the bottom, James said. Let's go and see. All right. Wait, Merriman said. As they turned in surprise, he raised an arm and pointed inland, back along the headland towards the silent gray group of standing stones that overlooked Truissic Bay. For a moment, Jane noticed nothing. Then she saw a patch of brownish red moving across them very fast, a patch that resolved itself in a few moments into a form of a desperately running dog. Rufus? The red setter skidding to a halt in front of them, panting, trying to bark in odd little gasping, coughing sounds. He's always rushing up from nowhere, trying to tell people things, said Jane, helplessly crouching to rub his head. If only he could talk. Want to come with us, Rufus? Want to come and help find Barney and Simon? But it was very soon clear that Rufus wanted nothing but to persuade them to go back along the headland the way they had come. He jumped and whined and barked, and so they followed him. As they came closer to the standing stones, the great gray monoliths of granite in their lonely group up on the windy grass, they saw coming towards them from the village Simon, Barney, and Captain Tom's. They were moving slowly, the old man still hobbling with a stick. Jane could sense that suppressed impatience in the boy's deliberate pace. Merriman stood beside the standing stones as they came up to him. He looked only at Simon and said, Well? So he poured a little drop of some sort of oil into the grail, Simon said, so that it floated on top of the water, and Barney had to sit down and stare at it. Sit down? Barney said. Where? At the table, in the caravan. It was all dark, except for this funny kind of green light coming from the ceiling. I don't remember any green light. And for goodness sake, Simon, I'd remember if I'd seen the grail for even a second, and I know I didn't. Barney, Simon said. His voice shook with strain, and he leaned against the nearest standing stone. Will you shut up? You are in a spell of some sort. You don't remember anything. Yes, I do. I remember everything we did there, but there was hardly anything. I mean, we were only there a minute or two for me to get my drawing, and I never sat down inside. Barnabas, Merriman said. The voice was very soft, but there was a cold fierceness in it that made Barney sit still as stone. He said in a whisper, I'm sorry. Simon was paying him no attention. His eyes were glazed inturned, as if he were seeing something that was not there. Barney looked into the grail for a while, and then the van seemed to go very cold, and it was horrible all of a sudden. He started to talk, but he swallowed. It wasn't his voice that came out, it was different. And the way he talked was different too, the kind of words. He said a lot of things I didn't understand, about someone called Anubis, and making ready for the great gods. Then he said, They are here. Though he didn't say who he meant. And the painter, the man from the dark, he began asking questions, and Barney would answer them, but in this funny deep voice that just wasn't like his, but like someone else. Simon shifted restlessly. They all sat round him along the great stones, listening, intent, silent. The wind sank softly in the grass and round the towering columns. He said, Who has it? And Barney said, The Greenwitch has it. He said, Where? And Barney said, In the green depths, in the realm of Tethys, out of reach. The painter said, Not out of my reach. Barney didn't say anything for a bit, and then he went into his own voice. You could tell he was describing something he could see. He sounded very excited. He said, There's this weird great creature, all green and darkness all round it, except in one place, where there's a terrible bright light, too bright to look at. And it doesn't like you, or me, or anybody. It won't let anyone come near. The painter was all wound up, so twitchy he could hardly sit still. He said, What spell will command it? And all of a sudden it wasn't Barney anymore. His face went empty again, and that horrible deep voice came out and said, The spell of mana, and the spell of wreck, and the spell of lure, and yet none of these if Tethys has a mind against you. For the Greenwitch will be the creature of Tethys very soon now, with all the force of all life that came out of the sea. Ah, Captain Tom said. Will said sharply, The spell of mana, and the spell of wreck, and the spell of lure. Are you sure that's what he said? Weary and resentful, Simon raised his head and looked at him with dislike. Of course I'm sure. If you heard a voice like that coming out of your brother's mouth, you'd remember every word it said for the rest of your life. Will nodded gently, his round face expressionless, and Merriman said impatiently, Get on, get on. The painter came very close to Barney then, whispering, Simon said. I could scarcely hear him. He said, Tell me if I am observed. I thought Barney was going to pass out. He stared into the grail, and his face got twisted, and you could see the whites of his eyes, but then he was all right again, and the voice out of him said, You are safe if you keep from using the cold spells. And the man nodded his head and made a kind of hissing noise and looked very pleased. He leaned back in his chair, and I think he had asked all he wanted to, and he was going to stop. But all of a sudden Barney sat up very straight, and that horrible voice said very loudly, like shouting, Unless you find the secret of the thing of power in this high part of spring, and the Grail must go back to the light. You must make haste before the Greenwitch departs to the great deeps. You must make haste. Then it stopped, and Barney sort of slumped down in his chair, and Simon's voice wavered, and he sniffed hard, fiercely raising his head. And I grabbed him to make sure he was all right. And the painter was furious and yelled at me. I suppose he thought I'd broken the spell or whatever, so I got cross too, and yelled back that he wouldn't get very far when we told you all about this. He just sat back then with a nasty sort of smile and said that he only had to snap his fingers and we would forget everything that had happened for as far back as he chose. And Barney did, Jane said shakily, but you didn't.